So our next presenter is Tomas Gottfried. I don't know, I mean, probably a lot of you have been to Valle de Bravo. Have you ever seen there's a windmill close to the Muelle Municipal? Yes, no? Okay. Here's the story of that windmill. Tomas's, I think, great-grandfather was a partner of Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla is one of the most important inventors of our time. And he was competing with Edison with the technology to determine which technology was going to distribute energy worldwide. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it started way back for him and his family, the interest for energy and the interest for all things electricity. His father designed that wind turbine and that windmill that is in Valle in 1974. If I got the date wrong, it's just by a couple of years, but it was in the 70s. And he actually had to get a presidential permit because you could not auto-generate electricity at the time. Everything had to go through CFE, Luz y Fuerza, and whatnot. So I guess the point I'm arriving to is that Tomas has it in his blood, but he's also had some challenging projects, and his family company, Potencia Industrial, has tackled on some very interesting projects. We were very attracted by his presentation, and these stories came out when we started the interview process. So I'll leave it to him. Thanks.
Thank you. So, efficacy and efficiency are two concepts that we can use to search for a way to solve problems. Peter Drucker said that efficiency is doing things right, while effectiveness is doing the right things. When I started working, I was challenged with setting up a new production line for wind turbine generators. And if somebody had shared this quote with me at the time, it might have made me think, but it probably wouldn't have helped me very much. Truth is, I was terrified. The stakes were high, and it's sometimes difficult to know what the right thing is, which I really wasn't familiar with what I was really getting into. So, however, someone did share with me another story of success against terrible odds. Back in the 70s, Mexico didn't have a single national grid. Instead, it had many small, independent, and incompatible grids. And this was a huge problem, but and it wasn't a problem that other countries hadn't gone through. Mexico, being an early adopter of electricity, by the 70s already had an enormous infrastructure. Countries like the UK, which was also an early adopter, had been able, it was an early adopter and had started with several different technologies. However, they solved their problem of unifying the grid back in the 20s. And so here was Mexico in the 70s, and they still hadn't done it. And a huge amount of infrastructure had already been built. So the problem of not having a single unified grid meant that you couldn't produce energy in one part of the country and consume it in another. Mr. Pablo Tapi knew that this was a huge problem. However, Mexico hadn't solved it, not because they didn't want to, but because the experts since the 40s and 50s had always claimed that the problem was too large and too complex, and therefore would be too expensive to solve. And so time went by and time went by. However, Mr. Pablo Tapi knew that the future of Mexico would be compromised if this problem wasn't solved. And so through a huge effort, he was able to convince the president at the time to give him a chance, just a chance to try and solve the problem. And his approach was really quite simple. His approach was start now before it gets worse. Start now, even if you have to start small. And so what he did was go to a house which was not on the 60 hertz grid, and he took every appliance in that house and fixed it so that it would work on 60 hertz, which is what we have today, which is the unifying frequency of the country. And then he went house by house. Eventually, he was clearing street by street. Then his team grew, and they were clearing town by town. Industry jumped on the train, and him and his team eventually got this problem solved in only 3 years. Only 3 years. And they came in at less than half the budget that was originally expected. But what's really important is that Pablo Tapí understood that regardless of how expensive it was to solve this huge problem, it was still cheaper to solve it than to not do anything about it. And I guess that sounds familiar to some of the problems we have today. One of them is climate change. And it's really a good example of the lack of will, because I'm pretty confident that today we already have the technology and the means to get off fossil fuels. What's really lacking is the will, is the collective will. To all those people who say it's too expensive and it's not possible and the technology is not there yet, they kind of remind me of those so-called experts that Pablo Tapí proved wrong. And there's a lot of examples of what lack of will can cause to projects that are important. For example, New York City is building a subway line today. But because of people's bad attitude, and I'm talking about you have the gas people and the electrical people and the plumbing and the sewage and the telephone company, and they're all fighting each other, trying to get someone else to take care of the problem and to be responsible of the issues and dealing with the liabilities. And it's just this bad attitude causes that in New York, it is 8 times more expensive to build a subway on a per kilometer basis than it is in Paris or in Copenhagen. So it really is just about their attitude towards the challenge. And so what can we do to not trip ourselves up when we think about our contribution towards solving such a big issue as global warming and climate change? If you look around you, there's opportunities everywhere. Start small if you have to, like Pablo Tapí did. Change a light bulb, buy a hybrid. Or if you can, go ahead and choose to live and work in buildings that are not wasteful of energy, unlike 95% of buildings being used today. Mexico in particular is in a great position to make a difference in the world. Industry here has already recognized and has already gone a long way towards adopting renewable energies and investing in them and getting the cost savings that those technologies bring. We also have great people here. We have excellent technical schools, and the engineers being graduated from these technical schools in Mexico really have amazing capabilities. This is really a wonderful place to start a high-tech company. The engineers have a lot of knowledge, but they also have a great attitude towards work and problem solving. Government is also playing a role. Mexico City in particular, Mexico City government has been very active in improving the environment as well as allowing new technologies to be implemented. This is a graph showing the air pollution in Mexico City since the 90s till last year. And for all those people who always think or always say that pollution is only getting worse and the problem is only getting worse and the city is unlivable, I can tell you that, on the contrary, pollution has only gotten better. And it's largely thanks to policy and technology. And if you ask yourselves, well, then why only last year? There were so many days of the week where I couldn't drive my car because the pollution was so bad. It wasn't because pollution was worse than the year before that. It was because the standards of what we consider acceptable became stricter. And after all, that's what we should be rooting for, right? Clean air. It's worth it. So for all those people who complained about not being able to drive their car, there is a solution, and some companies have already adopted it. Bimbo, for example, has a large fleet, and it's growing. It's a growing fleet of electric delivery trucks. The company I work for makes the motors, the electric motors that these use, which are 100% Mexican engineering and manufacture. These electric cars are exempt from the contingency plans on pollution. So it's a great option. Let me go back. Last year, during the spring days when the pollution was really bad, all stock and inventory of hybrid and electric cars in the entire country was sold out. They were all sold here in Mexico City. And it's very likely it's going to happen again this year. This is a project that the Mexico City government is funding. It's a feasibility project for electric cars to be used as taxi cabs. This is again something I'm involved in. This has been done by the company I work for. And we will be delivering these cars in the late summer, and they'll be tested for a couple of years to determine their economic feasibility for a larger scale project, working together with automakers. And again, designed and made in Mexico. This is a picture of a generator I took last week on the shop floor. It's a generator that will be producing electric energy from ocean currents in Norway. And we're also doing things for the subway here in Mexico. We're improving the motors that the trains use so that they consume less electricity. Or in this case, so that wind turbines can produce more electricity. Or in this case, so that industrial processes can cut half the amount of power that they use. And there's really, everywhere you look, there's opportunities to reduce your consumption or to consume it from better sources. So to wrap things up, I found this other quote, which I like better than the original. I think it's more useful, which is, efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. Success, however, is doing the right things right now. So go ahead and and get involved, make your contribution. I would say that it's especially important that you go ahead and start now and become familiar with how much you consume. Become familiar, kind of know the numbers of how much you're consuming, and also where you're consuming from. Where do all those resources come from? It's really useful. So you can start, because the important thing is that you start now. Start small if you have to, but go ahead and do it, because after all, it's easy.